Today I'm speaking with author and speaker Carlos Whitaker about his new book, Reconnected. Like many of us, Carlos had lived for years in an always-on, always-connected world, and he felt more disconnected than ever from God, his community, and even himself. When Carlos realized how many hours he was on his phone, he took extreme measures to see how unplugging could change his body and soul. In Reconnected, Carlos shares the challenges, surprises, and profound insights from his self-imposed exile from technology, spending nearly 2 months screen-free at a monastery, an Amish farm, and at home, blending wisdom from the past, practices of intentionality and community, and Whitaker's signature engaging communication style. Reconnected will inspire and equip you to reset your life in a tech-saturated world. Carlos Whitaker is bringing hope to humans all over the world. He's an author, podcaster, and global speaker backed by the power of his enthusiastic social media followers who tune in daily to join forces with Carlos in connection to do good and to be in community. His superpower is creating spaces, online and in person, where people are safe to engage in conversation about the topics that matter most but are often avoided. Carlos and his wife, Heather, live in Nashville, Tennessee, with their 3 amazing children. Well, Carlos Whitaker, thank you so much for joining me today. Your content could not be more spot on.
Well, I love it. When I was doing a little bit of research into everything that you talk about and do, I was like, whoa, these are my people. So that's pretty fun.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was so fun for me to read your book because you're bringing the timeless teachings, right, of spiritual direction and spiritual formation, but you made it really fun. I mean, you're such a great storyteller. So I was engaged the whole way through. It was a wonderful read.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I actually had somebody else tell me that too. They're like, you basically wrote like a spiritual formation book without maybe meaning to. I was like, well, it's funny what happens, how we can reconnect with maybe who God created us to be when we get rid of the things that disconnect us from that. And so, it just kind of happens.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, I'm wondering if just without, going into the whole thing and maybe just a little background on the book. So maybe my real question is, what led you to this experiment and why did you choose a monastery and an Amish family?
Yes, absolutely. So 7.5 weeks without looking at a single screen, consuming from any screens. I got that screen time notification that we all get on Sundays that basically slaps our wrists and tells us how many hours and minutes a day we've been spending on our phone. And mine happened to say 7 hours and 23 minutes a day. This was sometime in 2022. And I thought, oh my gosh, like, let me do the math. And then, so I did the math, and the math was 49 hours a week, which is, 2 entire cycles of the sun that I'm looking at my phone, 3 months a year. And that was the most nauseating stat that I kind of, when I was doing the math. But then I kept doing the math. And the last one was that I was going to spend over 10 years of my remaining life, if I happen to even live to be 70 some odd years old, looking at my phone. And I thought, well, wait a second. That's not, I don't think this is how we're supposed to be living. And so that led me to make a decision to go screen free. Initially, it was just going to be like 2 weeks. And then I got a neuroscientist involved, and he's like, if you want to see any changes in your brain, you may need to go like 2 months. And I was like, what? So I got a neuroscientist involved, and then I just kind of started thinking, well, I don't want to lock myself in a cabin and go crazy. So like, maybe I can find some subcultures in America that maybe aren't on screens as much as I am. And so I found a group of Benedictine monks in the high desert of Southern California. Hung out with them. And then I found a sheep farming family, Amish family in Mount Hope, Ohio. And I moved in with them. And so I lived with those 2 groups for a month. And then I looked at no screens with my family for 3 weeks, for a total of 7.5 weeks. And then I wrote a book about it.
So cool. Yeah, the Benedictines will definitely get under your skin. I was trained by them in spiritual direction. And so I got to live in community as well for a total of a month. It was 2 separate 2 weeks.
Sure.
But basically Benedictines turned a Baptist into an Anglican.
Oh, wow. They'll do that to you.
What a beautiful rhythm of life they have. So
Yes.
amazing. So that makes so much
Absolutely.
sense that you would choose them. I mean, they're just masters at that.
They really are. And, to be completely honest, the reason why I chose them specifically is my wife's father was like a high capacity volunteer at this monastery when she was a little girl. And so he passed away when she was 16. And my wife just kind of kept in touch with the monks. And so when I told her I want to go to monastery, she's like, well, how about Valiermo? How about St. Andrew's Abbey, where I know Father Francis? I mean, he knows me when I was a little girl. So she's the one that initially reached out, and they remembered her. Obviously, they remembered her father because he's actually buried with other oblates at the monastery. And so,
really?
Yeah, he's he's a legend there. And so they were more than willing to have me come for normally they let retreatants stay for like 3 days. And they have a kind of a rule on that, but they were like, no, absolutely. You can stay for 2 weeks. And so I got to really experience it.
Amazing. Well, I'm so thankful for that backstory, because I was wondering as I was reading how you ended up in California, because you live on the East Coast, right?
Yes. But my wife and I are both from California.
Okay. Oh, yeah. What city?
Yeah. So I was born in Pico Rivera, which is in East LA. And my wife is from Thousand Oaks.
Oh, we used to live in Simi Valley. Now we're in Orange County.
Yep.
Yeah. So
there it is.
We're down here.
Yep.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, let's keep talking about this.
Yeah.
I want to talk about acceleration.
Yeah.
Because you talk about the acceleration of the speed at which we take in information. Of course, it's increased. No one's going to argue with you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's mind-blowing, literally. So I'm wondering if you can talk with us for a bit, how that's affecting our souls, how it affected your soul.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the first 3 days I was there, when I went from, I don't know how many miles an hour my soul was living, but whatever speed that was, to the speed of the monks at St. Andrew's Abbey, that I call it Godspeed at 3 miles an hour. As they're, going from 1,000 miles an hour in my soul to 3 miles an hour was pretty shocking to my soul. Like, it was not only to my soul, but to my body. I mean, I was legitimately having like physical manifestations of, what I learned was literally like my brain was healing the dopamine levels and the serotonin levels and all of these things. I was having heart palpitations, night sweats. I felt like I had the flu. My body was legitimately coming off of this drug. And those first 3 days were so bad that once I hit day 4, it felt like an elephant stepped off my chest. And I was like, whoa, is this what it's supposed, is this what we were feeling before all these screens? Like, it was the most beautiful moment of, I tell people it kind of felt like, I don't know if you've ever had asthma before, but if you have asthma and then you're having a hard time breathing and then you take a hit from an inhaler and then that next breath, you actually go from like 50% to 100%. That's what it felt like on day 4. And I was like, oh, this is breathing. It's almost like I didn't know I was asthmatic, spiritually asthmatic, until I got there. And so, finally slowing down enough to, I say slowing down to catch up to God. And I tell people all the time, Jesus moved at 3 miles an hour and we're moving at 1,000 miles an hour. And so who's following who? Well, maybe we've got to get back to the speed at which we were created to live. And that's the pace I was able to live at for the next few weeks. And it was so healing to me. Just all of the, the 5 sessions a day we're in the chapel that we're praying, the Vespers and all the different liturgies. And then, I'm walking everywhere. I'm on a little campus. I never left the campus. I could walk everywhere. The food, was in silence, breakfast and dinner. You could speak during lunch and everything just felt so purposeful, like just so on purpose. And I was like, wow, I want to bring a little bit of this purpose back to my life.
Yeah, we're at such a speed. We don't move at noticing speed.
Yes.
Right. And I think it was St. Vincent de Paul. He said, those who hurry delay the things of God.
Yeah.
And so there's this pace at which we are flurrying. I've had the privilege of leading some trips to Italy, and I've been there 4 times now with groups of women. And when I get there, because I only go there maybe once or twice a year,
Yeah.
the first few days, I can feel my own culture like on me or revving in me.
Yeah.
Just because you get somewhere else and there's a different pace and a different vibe and a different way. Yep. And I think I run an organization called Unhurried Living. I'm unhurried, except I still live in this very revving culture.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're addressing. I mean, we're going to get to this, I'm sure, but I'm going to ask the question now too, like, how do you live this way now? You've tasted it. How did you bring that back to now?
Yeah. I've had to, and we will get into it, but one of the things that I think is a little bit counterintuitive to what I thought was going to happen when I got back. I thought what was going to happen was I was going to be like, okay, this is how I lived with the monks. I woke up at 5. I didn't look at a thing. I make sure I, ate for 90 minutes at a time. When I was with the monks, I made sure I walked everywhere. So I got to walk everywhere. I got to make sure I pray 6 times a day. So I thought I was going to have all these rules that I was going to implement back into my life. That was going to make me live the life that you're trying to teach people, that unhurried life, when actually that wasn't true. What ended up happening was I fell so in love, head over heels, with all of the things I'd forgotten how to do. All of the things that I don't think, unless we do something like this, we realize. Getting lost and finding my way. I'm not using GPS because I didn't have it. So when I was with the Amish, he would just tell me 15 roads and turns to go on, and I'd have to get on my e-bike and remember, and I would get lost. But I was like, gosh, it's so nice to get lost and find my way. Noticing, like you said, like I fell in love with noticing things around me that I'd not noticed. I never would have noticed had I had a screen in my hand. Savoring. We've lost the art of I fell back in love with savoring. And now, since I taste my coffee, it tastes so much better in the morning when I'm not scrolling on my phone and I can savor it. Wondering, like we don't wonder anymore. Wondering is almost extinct, because we have the answers at any time. But I didn't have the answer, so I had to like just wonder when I had a question. All of those things I fell so head over heels in love with that when I got back, I didn't want to stop doing those. And so because I didn't want to stop doing those things, I've just picked up my phone so much less, because I'm like, oh no, it's way better to wonder and not know the answer than to just look it up on Google. So I tell people, though, that's really the way that I was able to implement the speed at which I was moving. Was I just fell in love with that way of living.
Yeah. You mentioned a lot of words there, and a lot of your chapter titles even. I call these kinds of words process words. I haven't trademarked that or anything, but that's just what I call them. I like to collect those notice.
Yeah.
Right. Seasons. The word and.
Yeah.
Right. You said wonder. And there's so many presents, how many letting go, how many kinds of words like that. And I'm trying to adopt those more and more. And it sounds like you've collected. I love the words you came up with, actually. Yeah. As you shared with us. I think that's a big part of living this life, is changing even our vocabulary about how we say things or what we decide to focus on. Don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's so many comments I'm getting about the book. A lot of people really resonate with the chapter I entitled "Behold," and how beholding is a practice that we've lost, and just that awe and like you can actually behold all kinds of things, and you can do it every day. But I think changing the vocabulary and starting to use the word behold, it kind of brings some meat to it. It's like, well, if I'm going to behold every day, then I'm really going to have to intensely look for something that makes my jaw drop, which doesn't take a lot to find those things. They're littered all over if we just notice them, right? Like, and then so like, again, these things start piling on each other. It's so cool.
I know. It's so true. It's so true. The word that I love that's kind of a synonym for behold is the word gaze.
Yes.
How often do you gaze at someone or something? I don't know. It brings me alive too. So I was so excited to talk to you because I knew that you were on this path of these words and these dynamics. And again, both of us, even though, again, we have this, it's called Unhurried Living. We are not trying to tell people to just sit around and do nothing. What we're trying to do is get people attached back. It's the branch on the vine.
Yep.
And then all this produce happens because of that abiding moment.
Yes.
So it's not that we're saying don't do anything. What we're saying is remain,
Yeah.
abide,
Yeah.
and God produces the fruit. And then we get to enjoy that whole process.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? And my guess is you came back with a renewed, invigorated, maybe vision for living that kind of life.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it has been the greatest gift to my wife, to my kids, to my family, even to my even my friends. They're just like, you're so present. In all of our conversations, even. One thing I did was I put my phone on permanent do not disturb. So literally, I never for the last year and a half, I've not gotten one single notification on my. There's not been a buzz or a ding that has taken me away from being present with the person in front of me. And so it's not like my phone isn't waiting to tell me when I pick it up, because when I do pick it up, it's like, oh, look, I missed 4 calls from Spence, 2 messages, so I can call them back. It just doesn't interrupt me. And so again, all of these things that I've done to make sure I can just hang on as much as I can to, oh my gosh, to the gift that was St. Andrew's Abbey. And, I still talk to Father Carlos once a week just to make sure that, I am still connected, and yeah, there's just something about still being connected with those monks.
Carlos, I do have to say that I admire the journey you're on, because I know, again, we both live in this culture and it's really hard, but I have never done that where I put it on permanent do not disturb. I just have all my notifications turned off.
Yeah.
It's very similar, so that I don't have to know anything until I want to know something.
Yes, that's it.
And I just think that's healthy boundaries in some way.
Absolutely. And just that, if even if your listeners just do that, literally they will unhurry 50% of their life. Like it just suddenly you're in charge again.
Exactly. I get to decide what I do with my life. Right.
Yep.
Well, I want to come back to your kind of early days there at the monastery. And one of the things you shared was, because there was so much quiet, is that you were kind of afraid of your own thoughts.
Yes.
And I think that's important to talk about, because we work with people in solitude a lot. And I think it's a buried dynamic inside of people that they don't even know that, but there is a fear that's an undercurrent. Like, if I'm quiet, what's going to happen?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What was your experience of that?
Yeah. I was, my brain, I couldn't turn my brain off. And we normally can just, we think we turn it off by just scrolling TikTok, or we think we turn it off by, oh, really, we're just putting some Novocaine over a tooth, like over a toothache. Like it's still hurting. We're still going too fast. And so, yeah, I mean, it was 4 days, I'd say about 4 days of racing thoughts and trying to slow them down and not being able to. And, but was obviously what was really helpful was, my time with the monks. This is again why I think liturgy, is so important, and just that, praying the hours with the monks. I still pray like 2 or 3 of them a day. I've got my little, Benedictine, hours that I pray with the monks at St. Andrew's Abbey. But those sorts of things began to be the thing that calmed my mind. It began to be the content I consumed, quote unquote, that was like Godspeed content, and was, okay, slowly but surely, 3 or 4 or 5 days in, okay, gosh, yeah, the Psalms that we prayed last night before bed at 7:30, that they sung so beautifully, that calmed my mind before I went to sleep, and so it did take a few days. And people will say to me, well, you were detoxing, you were coming off of the drug of your phone. And I used to think that was the drug, but I realized pretty quickly in the experiment that I call it an experiment. It's not an experiment. I was the only data point, right? So it was just my version of what happened in my life. But the phone is actually not the drug. The phone is the needle. And I tell people, just like a heroin addict, they're using a needle to inject the heroin into their body, whatever drug it is that you're using. The phone isn't the drug. The phone is just delivering to you what the drug is. And what I found my drug was control. And the drug that I wanted was control, which sometimes, can swim in the same place as knowledge. And so the more knowledge I had, the more control I felt like I had. And when knowledge and control got taken away, panic, began to ensue. But now coming back, I try to know I want to be like the least educated on so many things in all my friend groups, like I don't want to be the know-it-all. I'm like, I want to know what I need to know. and then not know the rest. Like for instance, one of the things I did was delete all the news apps off my phone. I no longer consume news on the phone because I think I knew too much. I think that God didn't design me to know every pain and trauma that was happening in my friend group across the country, across the world. And so now I subscribe to a newspaper and I get my newspaper in the morning. My son, he makes fun of me all the time now because I sit on my front porch and I read the news. I still think it's important to know the news. And so I read the news and it takes me 10 minutes. And when I'm done with my newspaper, if anything else happens on planet Earth, I'll find out tomorrow morning, And so these are the things that I began to do, some of the things I began to do to make sure that I was able to maintain my mind. Because once my mind healed and once I was able to get away from the racing thoughts that we're so scared of in solitude, or, because people I think confuse sometimes loneliness and solitude, right? Like, I'm like, you could be lonely in a group of people. Like, you don't have to have solitude to be lonely. And so, and you can also not be lonely when you have solitude. And so solitude is just something now that I do all the time. All my walks that I take, no AirPods, no phone. I'm not listening to podcast. Car rides, nope. I'm not listening to I try to think, what are the things 100 years ago that humans used to do in solitude that we would that we couldn't get away from solitude. And one of the things that humans always did in solitude is when they traveled alone, they were always in solitude. And so if I'm ever traveling alone, I always think that these are just things that I've started adding back into my life. Is like, well, 100 years ago, they didn't have car radio. So I'm not going to have car radio. I'm not going to listen to anything. If I'm in a group with some friends, we can turn on the radio but if I'm going to be alone, especially in the crazy busy world when it's so hard to find solitude, those are the places I'm going to start to sprinkle it back in.
Oh, good. Well, I'm wondering on that whole topic, you gave so many good ideas. If there's someone listening right now, and at least right now, they don't have a way to go away for that long and wait for 4 days for things to settle.
Yeah.
I mean, because you could plan that if you planned a year ahead, maybe. So I recommend that. But I'm just saying, for the run-of-the-mill person listening, what could they do today or this week?
Yeah.
It would help them ease into what you're describing.
Sure. Absolutely. The journey that I'm slowly starting to take people on myself is, when it comes to screen specifically, is we do 1 hour chunks. So I do a 1 hour chunk of no screen. Like, literally, when I say no screen, not in your pocket. I'm telling some people that I'm working with to, like, I want you to go to your next door neighbor. I want you to take your screen and have it be 200 yards away from you for just 1 hour. And I don't want a TV. I don't want anything. And I just want you to exist without your screen. And then next week, we're going to go, if we can go to 3. And I believe that then you go to 6 in a couple weeks. And then I honestly believe that if somebody can go all of their daytime, like a full day, so sun up to sundown, or just the whole day without a screen once a week, that's it. You don't have to move to a monastery. You don't have to be an Amish farmer. 1 day a week, okay, 12 straight hours, okay, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., whatever. If you can get, and I know this isn't something that everybody can do, but go as far as you can. I know some people, you have to be, nurses. I just spoke to a group of doctors and nurses last weekend at a corporate gathering, explaining this, and they're like, well, we got to have our phones on. And I was like, okay, well, then we've got to figure something out, but if people can get to like 12 hours from when you wake up to when you go to bed, straight, 1 day a week, no screens, I believe that will reset something in you that'll actually probably make you want to do it more than 1 day a week.
Yeah. So good. Thank you for that practical, that very, very practical step. Still hovering sort of around the dynamics that solitude raises. And we could talk for hours about this.
Sure.
So we talked about sort of the being afraid of our own thoughts. I'm wondering too, another thing that came up for you, and it comes up for a lot of people, is the idea of identity.
Yeah.
Who am I when I'm not doing what I do?
Yep.
And that can come up in an hour of solitude. It can definitely come up in weeks. I would love for you to talk to us about identity.
Yeah. These screens have, created identities in all of us that we get to, on the daily, whenever we want. We've got cameras pointed at our face 24/7 now. So we can create whatever identity we want for anyone to see, for the world to see. And I just think that what that's done is put unhealthy expectations, our own expectations on our shoulders to what we have to produce for people to believe that we are a certain way. And when I wasn't able to do that, when I was just talking with the Amish at the auction over lunch, like they couldn't go look me up or Google me, or like the only thing they were going to be able to base my identity on was what they got from me in that hour-long lunch, what they got from me, and so suddenly there was just so much pressure off of me to not perform. I just think that we've got, everything is so performance driven. Our jobs are so performance driven. Our, what we share, even, just if you have a family group thread, a group chat, on your phone, like everything is so performance based that there was just something that was freeing, that my identity was no longer based on my successes. It was just based on me. It was based on how, oh, Carlos, you're a really good listener. I'll never forget somebody telling me that. And I was like, I'm literally the worst listener I've ever known in my life. And suddenly, because I don't have a phone in my pocket, I'm now I'm now a good listener. Crazy, And so that's one of the reasons I, put my phone on do not disturb. But yeah, identity is and it was a big piece for me, just because, again, I've got 303,000 Instagram followers that, I put a post up and thousands of people like it and they'll comment and tell me how awesome I am. And then it went away. And wow, Carlos, now you're just going to have to trust me. This is God speaking. And I'm going to tell you who you are. And you're just going to have to believe that. And so, again, just stripping back all of the layers of, I think, misplaced identity. They were stripped off pretty quickly for me. But, if you don't have 7 weeks to spend with monks and Amish farmers, then I think you can just, again, you can start doing that one day a week. And I think it'll help.
The more you talk, the more I just hear the word freedom.
Yeah.
Just feel like you found a lot of freedoms from things that were imposing on you or pressing down on you or making you feel or think a certain way or whatever. Detaching. It is very hard. I have this love-hate relationship with Instagram for sure.
Sure.
And you just want to lose heart because I know there's an algorithm and there's a game to play. And I have never been able to figure out how to be a part of that. And yet, I love to connect with people in that way. I have women on there who talk to me and there's something real there. I've actually made friends that I've now met in person.
Yeah.
And so there's a beauty within it. And also it just feels like this never ending thing that I can't figure out. And so how do you do the both and? How are you doing that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I pretty much make my living on Instagram. I talk to my phone every day. I make reels and I put them up. And when I first got that 7 hours and 23 minutes a day notification, I initially quickly just made an excuse. I was like, well, this is what I do for a living. I talk to my phone. Like, this is my job. My CPA friends are in front of their laptops doing math all day long. Why can't I, so I made my excuse. But then when I went away and I came back, I wanted to become a fly fishing guide. Like, I was like, what can I do? And to never have to pick this up again. And my wife's like, I mean, we'd have to sell the house. We'd have to, we have to figure some things out. But I was like, okay, well, let me see if implementing these practices that, beholding, savoring, noticing, wondering all the things, what it does. So what that did was it took my screen time down from 7.5 hours a day to about 3 hours a day. And I'm living now at about 3 hours a day. I'm still on Instagram. I'm still producing the same amount of content. I'm still growing my platform at more than half cut off from what I was doing before. So I think to myself, well, what that did was it literally gave me half of my life back that I was losing, right? So I got it back, and I realized that Instagram's still there. I don't think there's anything wrong with phones. Again, I tell people that this book isn't about why phones are bad. It's why it's beautiful on the other side of the phone. When you fall in love with what's beautiful on the other side of the phone, you pick your phone up a whole lot less. And so that's what's ended up happening for me. And so I just am way more purposeful with my Instagram. I talk about purpose a lot when I was with the monks. They just felt everything they did, the pace, the way they eat, the way they pray, the way they talk, everything had a purpose. And I was like, when I get on my phone, there's going to be a purpose. I'm going to make sure there's no more purposeless scrolling. It's beyond purpose. Not that I don't have an off night here or there where I'm, or an off week where I look at my phone and I'm averaging 6 hours a day again. And I'm like, oh, well, my book was launching, or things are going to happen. And so like, don't shame yourself. Don't try to shame yourself into, being on your phone a lot less. Understand that social media is neither good nor bad. It's just a thing. And so we just have to make sure we're in charge of it. It's not in charge of us. And yeah, so I'm still on Instagram every single day. I'm still telling stories. I'm still sharing the story of my father and my mom who live across the street from me and his dementia journey. And it touches so many people. And I get all these DMs going, I don't feel alone, right? Like, these are all things that you probably understand, talking to the women on Instagram. And so I know how good it is in this culture where loneliness is becoming the next epidemic and people are so lonely. I understand that there is a way to feel connected with people through social media. I just would warn and tell people that if that's the only way that you're connecting with other people, there probably is more connection waiting for you offline.
I agree. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I want to swing back to something you spoke of very briefly a few minutes ago, and it's the idea of control. You talk about the illusion of control with the smartphone, but you shared a story of your mom. I'm wondering if you're willing to share that story here. It was so good.
Yeah. Was that the Life 360 story?
Oh, I think so.
Okay.
My goodness. I read this a few weeks ago. I just remember when Yeah,
well, maybe it is. I shared a couple stories about my mom in the book, so I want to make sure I'm telling the right one.
Okay.
But no, okay. So again, control, like our phones, the illusion of control they give us is, we feel like we're going to go to a good restaurant because Yelp told us that,
right.
That we're going to a good restaurant. Some guy named Bob with different taste buds than you that rated someplace 5 stars is now in control of you. And you think that you're in control, right? So like, we've got all of these things and apps that make us feel like we're in more control and we're making better decisions. And then there's an app called Life 360 where we can kind of track our kids if they're driving too fast and if they're, all of these things. Yes, I think this is it. And so, it's an app that, I think when my kids started driving, I thought, oh, this is great. Like, now I can know if they're speeding. It'll tell me if they're speeding. It'll tell me if they brake too hard. It'll tell me if they're leaving the place on time. It'll tell me when they arrive to the place, all of these things. And I'll never forget, my mom was like, I'm so glad that I didn't have Life 360 to be able to track you when you were a teenager. And I was like, why? She's like, because I think it would make me worry more. It would actually, without me even knowing, it would be raising my anxiety level because I'd just be checking and wondering. Whereas opposed to like when you were in high school and you're like, hey, Mom, I'm going to, Denny's with the guys. And I'd say, be home at 9:30. I would just trust that you would go. And there were times that you didn't end up going to the place, I always found out, and she just was like, it's just an extra layer of control that I'm grateful I didn't have. And so immediately, I took Life 360 off all my kids' phones, off my phone. And we're in this new trust ecosystem where I'm just not worried anymore. And she's like, well, Carlos, one time you did get in that accident, remember? And I said, yeah. And she's like, and you know what? You called me. Somebody was able to give you a phone to where you could call me. And it just, those are the things I think that we need to start to let go of, all of those control features.
Yeah, that was the story.
Yeah.
I loved that because I'm I think quite a few years older than you. So I grew up way back in the day when, there was nothing. We had a party line. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you even know what a party line is?
Yeah, it's where you share it with your neighbors, right?
You share, yeah. So you have to pick it up and see if someone's talking before you start dialing.
Amazing.
Back in the day, no VCRs, no machines. It's just I do remember. I'm nostalgic for that kind of simplicity.
Sure. Yeah.
And just the non-awareness of what was going on. There was kind of nice being blissfully ignorant, maybe in a lot of ways.
Totally.
But I think that was a beautiful thing you learned from your mom on that one. So I just wanted you to share that story. I thought it was so good.
Oh, thank you.
There's another story I wanted you to tell if you're willing to. Of course, you still have to buy the book, and there's a lot more stories in here. But that mom story, the other story that I loved was the one from the Amish community. I think it was in your intuition was about the rain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that story. Are you willing to share that one?
Of course. I love that story. Intuition, something that we've lost because I believe that we were designed to get lost and find our way. And we no longer have to do that in any avenue of our life. I'm not even just talking about directional speaking if you're driving, but getting lost and finding our way in other areas of our life. And intuition was something that the Amish rely on that I quickly realized I'd stopped relying on. Just like your gut, right? Just like, I got a hunch. And with Google these days, we're hunchless. And I'll never forget, we're trying to, we're trying to, I'd been there, I think it's 7 days with the Amish at this point. Now, and again, I'm on a sheep farm. And so I'm learning about the sheep from Farmer Willis, and I'm learning about making hay, and we're supposed to cut the grass and all the things. And it's 7 days of us waiting for the grass to dry so that we can rake it and then bale it. Okay. So he'd already cut it, I think. But and so every day I walk out and it's it's either rained the night before or something. So I'd woken up, it's 7 days in, and I was like, oh, it's not raining. Sweet. This is going to be the day we're finally going to rake the hay. But then I walk out of my little tiny house, and it's there's lightning, and I see thunderclouds in the distance. I'm like, oh, I guess we're not raking the hay today. It's about to pour, it'll dump black clouds. So I walked over to Willis, to the farmhouse, and I was like, well, looks like we're not doing hay today. He's like, oh no, we're going to do hay. And I was like, what, Willis, you told me that it can't rain on the hay, that the hay has to be, dry. He's like, yep. He's like, but I want you to look at your boots. And I was like, what? He was always talking in weird riddles like this, the Amish people. It's like, what do you mean, look at my boots? He's like, what do you see on your boots? And I was like, I don't know, grass clippings? He's like, no, look closer. So I looked and I was like, they're wet? He's like, exactly. He goes, there's dew on your boots this morning when you walk through the grass. And something tells me if there's dew on your boots, it's not going to rain. I was like, what do you mean something tells you that? He's like, well, my papa taught me all the time. If there's dew on your boots, it's probably not going to rain, so you can do hay. And I'm just looking at the thunderheads a mile away from us thinking, Willis, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. You're going to ruin all your hay, but whatever, you're the pro, do it. And so I leave with Kathy, his wife, and Krista, his daughter, and we go to another farm to visit. One thing the Amish love to do is just visit. They just go visit with each other because they don't have Facebook, so they visit. So we go, and while we're there, we're 2 miles away. It's dumping rain on us the whole time. I mean, not torrential downpour for 2 hours. Just, I was like, I can't believe Willis started to do the hay, Kathy. He's going to ruin your hay. She's like, well, he said it's not going to rain. There's dew on your boots. So we get back and we start heading back to the farm. And I'm not maybe a mile away from the farm. The rain just stops, and it didn't stop it had rain there and it moved away. It was dry, and I was like, my jaw dropped, and we rounded the corner into the farm, and Willis is almost standing there, almost looks like he's waiting for me, kind of with this big smile on his face. And I get out, and he goes, there was dew on my boots. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just was freaking out. And I just think to myself, those are the things, that I think are uniquely human. That we don't trust anymore, our intuition. And so that was just a fun intuition story about it. So all the time, and whenever I walk outside of my front yard now, I always look down to see if there's dew on my boots.
I'm never going to forget it. I never knew that before. I just thought that was, what a beautiful story of just being in tune with how things work.
Yes.
And it goes completely
sure there's some scientific reason why, right? But who knows?
Of course, but there's been people who have lived all through the centuries who just learned how things work without having a scientific degree.
Yes,
just by being observant and knowing and experience. And I think your point is well taken here. It comes back to the Yelp review. I mean, can you just go out and try a thing without knowing? I mean, just
try it with. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Without knowing. And so, and especially, I think it is good for us to have to learn how to have a felt sense of what God has told us, in our hearts or our guts, of what is good.
Yes.
Or true.
We know.
I think we know more.
We know more than we give ourselves credit for.
I agree. Well, I'm wondering if maybe let's let the Benedictines close us out here. Yeah. You were talking about their vows of stability, obedience, and fidelity.
Yeah.
I wonder, what would you want to say about those breed dynamics, and how would they help us now?
Yeah, the, especially um, stability. I
Mm.
just think if there's one thing that people don't feel in their life, it is a sense of steadiness under their feet. And I found that the rhythms that were practiced, and you know what? I think it actually could have been 20 other rhythms. There's just something about a rhythm, right? Like, what is the rhythm that you can have in your life every day that creates some sense of stability? And that doesn't mean that you have to like live a boring life. That doesn't mean that you have to. I still am very adventurous. I've been all over the world this year. And because of what I learned from the Benedictines, the taking the vow of stability, um, I have made sure to include things and rhythms in my life that give me that stability no matter where I am, my rhythms, right? So I can be in Bali, I can be in Rwanda, I can be wherever. And I've got these rhythms in my life. I've got my little Benedictine hours that I pray through. I've got all the things now that I mean, right. I'm former Baptist too. And like, ended up at like a super charismatic church. And I'm like, falling in love with the, Catholics and the Anglicans, and it's beautiful, sweet mess of things. But I just feel like, the vow of stability, and it's a vow. That's another word that I think is very important. Let's not just try this. Let's actually make a vow. This is something that we're going to implement into our life forever. How do we remain stable in what we do? And there's, if you look at your life, you've probably made vows that you don't even know you've made on things. And so don't think that taking a vow of stability, obedience to taking these vows is going to be something scary. You've already vowed to a lot of things that you probably can break some of those vows and add some new ones in. And yeah, and it's just, there's just something beautiful about, I think for me, watching them and watching the peace that they had. There was just this, I would talk to them a lot about anxiety, because I was like, do you guys struggle with like anxiety? And they're like, well, of course, like we worry about things, but I don't think we have anxiety the way you and your culture has anxiety, because there's just not a lot to be anxious about, because we know what our days look like. We know what is now, of course, if someone gets sick, we can have anxiety about that. But for the most part, I looked at my life and all the anxiety I had in my life, and I was like, it's because there was no stability, you know? And so I think the more stable I've become, the more I have removed some semblance of anxiety out of my life.
Oh, that makes so much sense. I mean, because there are temperaments that are more kind of freewheeling. I mean, I'm kind of one of those as well.
Yeah.
I get that. But I do know that having some rootedness or some stability, something firm.
Yeah.
Which is why I married my husband. He is absolutely that kind of person. He's like a rock.
Yeah.
And so I can be my little whatever over here. And he's
butterfly
just
over there.
Rock.
He's the rock you can land on when you're done flying around.
Oh, isn't that so funny? It's so true. And you've used the word rhythm a handful of times. Of course, from the Benedictines, you would have a rule of life. We like to call it a rhythm of life.
Yeah.
And people can learn how to put things in place. Because again, we're not talking about necessarily this rigid daily little or weekly structure, but what if you had patterns and rhythms in your life of this goodness of receptivity or of listening or of noticing? I think people could easily, once a day, once a week, can you make a little time to just put yourself in not production mode,
right,
but receptivity mode? Even that is a huge thing.
Yes. We're just, gosh, and again, I'm talking to people that try to do things on Instagram or social media for a living. We're just trying to make things more. And it's like, wait a second, just stop making something. I think the noise is so loud in our lives that like we've actually like lost a lot of ideas because we're constantly doing. And I'm like, I got more ideas. I heard the voice of God so much louder when the volume of life went down. And then I was finally able to hear some ideas that I never would have had I been producing, trying to, run, race. And so, it's so important.
Yeah, I could not agree more.
Yeah.
We were introduced to solitude and silence when we were in our 20s, which I count as a great gift. So I've been practicing this for 35 years.
Amazing.
And what I can tell you is it was a new way of me learning to allow, this is going to sound so weird, to allow God to be God. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of just presuming who God was, to allow God to show me himself for who he was. But he also showed me who I was.
Yeah.
And I developed this whole new way of listening that has traveled with me through the decades. Not perfectly. No one's claiming to do anything perfectly here. What I'm saying, though, is there's a space built inside of me now that could be aware if I allow it, instead of, being too busy or producing too much. There's a space inside of me that God has built. Where I think that's where that creativity lives, the insight,
absolutely,
discernment, other beautiful words that we don't use much. Don't you think?
Absolutely. No, I love the way you said, because I feel like one of the things that my phone did was it made God really small. It made who God was really. It was this nice little neat package that these YouTube sermons and my little Instagram quotes, the scripture that would scroll by, be like, oh, God is in his little thing. And then when I didn't have my phone and my YouTube and my podcast and all the things that maybe was keeping God in a little box, and he just like exploded all over me when I was at the monastery and I was freaking out. I was like, oh, God's so much bigger, and I have all these questions now that I didn't have before. I was like, oh, God was like, yes, see that now we're back in relationship.
I love that so much, Carlos.
Yeah.
Well, I so appreciate it. I'm so thankful that you said yes. As soon as I saw the topic of your book, I knew I wanted to talk to you. And then it was such a fun read, but just buy it so you can get all of Carlos's words, like intuition and beholding. I mean, the list of words is worth it, because if you took any one of them and started doing it, I think it would change you.
Absolutely.
That's what I think.
It did me. Yep, it did me.
So maybe one last, is there one thing you'd like to leave our listeners with after all this conversation? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say, remember that, screens aren't bad and they're not going away. And that I don't want your listeners to feel pressure, like, oh gosh, I've got to like not look at my phone. I want them to remember that it's all the words that are in my book, all the chapter titles. Those are the things that the phone, this wasn't an experiment about a phone after 4 days, right? So I spent 6.5 weeks. I thought it was going to be a 7-week experiment about a phone. No, it was only an experiment about a phone for 3 days. Then it became an experiment about all these other amazing things. And so what I want your listeners to realize is there's just so much more beauty waiting for them on the other side of the screen. I say on the other side of do not disturb, where I think a lot of relationships can get healed. A lot of people can find healing that maybe they've been looking for in a pretty loud world for a long time. And it's probably just been hidden right there in front of them, and they just weren't able to see it.
Great. Thank you so much, Carlos.
You're
the book is called Reconnected. What's the subtitle?
Yeah, Reconnected, the longest subtitle on planet Earth. It's How 7 Screen-Free Weeks with Monks and Amish Farmers Helped Me Recover the Lost Art of Being Human.
There it is. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to the Unhurried Living Podcast. You'll find many helpful links in the show notes so you can get to know us better, as well as our partner, Life Audio, and all of their other faith-centered podcasts. Join us next time to learn more about following the genius of Jesus's unhurried way of life and leadership.